The Jacksonville Jaguars improved themselves with a caveat. And that caveat is you won't see it until next year. I'll tell you about all of that here in just a second on today's edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for joining us for a full edition of Locked On Jaguars. Today, I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. Been covering this team for about 12 years now professionally. So I do a daily podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, inviting you all to join us and make us your first listen because it's your team every day. We are also on every platform where you get your podcast, including YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And I have to also let you know that today's podcast is sponsored and brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. Today's episode is presented by PrizePicks, and PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive 100% of an instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. I'm going to let you guys know today what I feel about the long and short-term ramifications or implications or benefits from the Jaguars making a trade at the trade deadline for Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who was suspended, by the way, and is still suspended for the minimum the rest of this season. I tried to look into it to see if it was indefinite or if it was just exactly a 1-year suspension. Most people think that the 1-year suspension is going to suffice and he'll be reinstated. But this word that I found out was quandary. The Jaguars were in a quandary in terms of trying to get talent, especially at the wide receiver position. So I'll discuss that to you and why I think that this helps solve that problem a little bit. Things that they didn't do, people that I thought that they may have a chance to go after. Chase Claypool is one of them. They did not make those moves. I'll tell you why I thought they should have. We'll discuss the valuation too, and that'll tie in to the quandary part of it, that a lot of fans expect something that they're not willing to spend for, and how and why it's so difficult to make these decisions. Also, a little silver lining. I'll tell you a silver lining and why this helps them in the offseason with things that we believe that they have to get. But let's talk about the deal first. The Jaguars made the trade to Atlanta. Of course, we've already established that Calvin Ridley won't be playing this year. I don't have a problem with or any trepidation about the fact that he'll miss an entire season and what the Jaguars will be getting once he's reinstated at training camp next year, because I just treat it like a guy who's been hurt without actually being hurt. Like Travis Etienne is playing lights out, and he'd never played an NFL game, and he actually had to rehab an injury. Calvin Ridley is only, rehabbing. And by the way, he's suspended for gambling and betting on the game. I don't think gambling is the worst thing in the world. I do it myself, obviously, with BetOnline. But I will tell you this. You know what the rules are. You got to follow the rules. If you don't follow the rules, you hurt your team, you hurt your city, you hurt your organization, and you hurt your own career because it costs you money. You can't do it for obvious reasons if you're playing and the league has any association with gambling and people actually gamble on what they think is a real event, then they can't allow you to gamble. And even though he gambled on his own team to win, apparently, or allegedly, it does not matter. There's a zero tolerance policy for it. I totally get it, and I totally understand it. Some people think it's harsh. I don't when you consider the larger ramifications of why they do what they do and the legitimacy that has to be involved with the league. So now that we got that out of the way, I think this is a good move by Trent Baalke. This is a really, really good move by the organization because you check a box off that had to be checked off, right? Calvin Ridley can be a true number one receiver or as close to it as you're going to get without salvaging and mortgaging the future of your football team. And that's that quandary I talked about. Most fans and most media, we can all sit and talk about what we think the team needs. How do you get it? How do you go out and obtain it? Well, you get it in free agency, you make trades, or you draft it, right? They haven't been good at drafting this stuff. Um, Guys that are true number ones at just about any position, unless it's an odd situation, they don't become available in free agency very often. So you can just go out and break the bank. You're going to always overpay in free agents for something. When's the last time a pure number one wide receiver hit the free agency market? They've all been traded as of late, right? So it's just not something that you can just ride down the street and go, oh, there's an X receiver. Jump in, man. Let's go catch 90 balls for 1,400 yards. Doesn't work like that because if that was the case, the Jaguars would have had more than 2 or 3 guys in their entire history that have done it. You want a lot of stuff. You want to go shopping on Fifth Avenue, but you want to take a secured credit card with a $150 limit a lot of times. So when we talk about the deals that need to be made, a lot of folks go, no, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do this, and I wouldn't do that. I'll tell you why I feel the way I felt yesterday about some of the deals that were made and some of the deals that weren't made. By the way, for anyone who characterizes this as the Jaguars are just looking towards their future, that's partially true. Every team should be looking towards their future, but simultaneously trying to win the day also. I would have done this. The Jags are 2-6, and I would have been applauding this if they were 6-2, because it's just the kind of thing that you do. You just do this. Now, Trent Baalke said that they're going to be adding Calvin Ridley to their very talented wide receiver room. I disagree with that classification. I also disagree with the people that think that they know why he said it. That he said it because he's trying to instill confidence. Somebody wrote that. No, he said it because these are the guys that he handpicked. You think people call their own kids ugly? No, they don't. And relatives don't even call their own kids ugly. Relatives will just say, oh, little fella looked like you when you were younger or something like that. But they ain't just going to flat out just tell you that the kid ain't, because nobody says that about their own people. And Trent is not going to self-correct himself in front of the whole world and say he made a mistake. Of course he's not, because then he'd have to explain that to the owner. He has to sell that this is just a very unique situation that just happened to pop up. But we're thinking, no, you needed a number one receiver and you found a creative way to get one, because the only way to get one when you can't draft one or sign one in free agency is you have to make a trade for one who the other team can't afford to pay, or you got to find a guy who's hurt or in trouble. You give you an example. Hurt or in trouble. Really? Trouble. Antonio Brown, trouble with a capital T. Odell Beckham Jr., hurt. Those are number one receivers that are available to you. And look, the only guys that are readily available are guys that have something going on with them. It's no coincidence, because dudes just aren't sitting out there and just aren't available. Teams just usually, if you do trade for one, it's going to cost you a whole bunch of draft capital, of course, unless you're dealing with Houston Texans, because they gave away a Hall of Famer in DeAndre Hopkins. And I'm questioning Minnesota too, just because Justin Jefferson is good. Well, they ain't know that when they gave away Stephon Diggs, who also looks like he's going to Canton and making Buffalo better. But at least they got a number one draft pick for him, right? So all I tell you is the quandary is wanting to do something, but not really understanding what it takes to get it done, but you still insist that it needs to be done in it. It's like it's so much mental gymnastics that goes on with it. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss it in segment 2. We're going to talk about things that were available or that we thought were available, but no one, that there was a lot. It was a really polarizing subject that people didn't subscribe to and people didn't really jump with. I'll discuss all of that in segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars. I want to holler at you about SimpliSafe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security, but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Jaguars listeners can order the number one rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't and don't want to miss it. Here's why I love Simply Safe. Did you know that over the holidays, property crimes like burglaries and package thefts spike nationally? That's why our friends at Simply Safe Home Security are offering 50% off their award-winning security system so that more families can feel safe and secure this holiday season. Order your Simply Safe system for half off today and enjoy advanced security and greater peace of mind this holiday season. Now, my son built a very nice home for him and his fiance and hopefully their future children. But I want to make sure he was safe. So I told him about Simply Safe. He got it installed, and voila, there's 24/7 monitoring, and Simply Safe tech support staff is always there to help. Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report, a third year in a row. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/locked on today. That's right. Simplysafe.com/locked on. This is their biggest discount of the year. So don't wait. It's simplysafe/locked on NFL. Let's add that right. Locked on NFL. Now listen. Spell it SIMPLISAFE.com/locked on NFL. There's no safe like Simply Safe. There's no place like Locked On Jaguars. If you want daily Jaguars information, I am your man, Tony Wiggins here. We thank you for making us your first listen. So a lot of stuff went down yesterday. I think the Calvin Ridley trade was good for the Jaguars' future. I'll talk more exactly about that in segment 3. But first, we'll tell you some of the things that didn't happen. Apparently, there were teams feeling or sending offers for Josh Allen, the edge rusher for the Jaguars. Let me explain why I, a guy who's been a proponent of keeping good players and building your foundation, I just think Josh is going to cost too much. If the Jaguars come out and extend Josh Allen right now, and it's not one of those contracts that you think a guy like Bradley Chubb is going to get, and it's reasonable, it's somewhere in the 5-year, $80 million range, I don't have no problem with it because I think that's what he is. But what I don't believe he is a 5-year, $115 million guy. But it seems like around the league, his name kind of rings out like that's what it is. Josh has done a good job to a certain degree with pressures, but it's not just the overall pressures. It's the feeling that I just like to leave room for elite guys. And if he's going to be the best you have, he has to always play like the best you have. I just see guys like Von Miller, and I know I'm talking about a first ballot guy there, but you just see stuff like that. You say, man, why can't we have some of that? And why can't we have a guy that can do that? Like consistently every single play, you have to account for him. What about TJ Watt and guys like that? Why can't we have those things? And we can't expect yet a rookie like Travon Walker, who isn't statistically one of the top pass rushers amongst the starters in the NFL, to be ready to do all of that stuff. He was picked for that in the future, but a lot of other reasons. And that's another argument for another day that you take a guy like that at number 1. But I firmly believe that while he's a good player, you have to make a choice that if you got to pay him like he's a great player, then you probably need to do something else and move on to get a draft pick. So I was also looking at the fact that right now the Jaguars are currently 5th in the draft of 2023. I believe the top 2 picks consensus-wise from scouts are quarterbacks. They're not going to make a move yet in that direction, no matter how you feel about Trevor. So if they end up at 5, they wouldn't get one of those guys anyway, but their schedule is so tough, it might be that they won't be favored in any game, maybe one game the rest of the way. So it might end up being that, at worst, they win 3 games, which would be a tremendous disappointment, but it'll put them in that top 3 area. Take those 2 quarterbacks out. You know what's sitting there? You got it, an edge rusher. Now, I'm not against taking another one. It's just that for me, when you start looking at the way that you disperse money and you spread money out in your team building process, when you're a bad team, the worst thing that you can have is a whole bunch of guys that play the same position who can't play together in your base defense. The only way that I would really subscribe to approving that wholeheartedly that they take another edge rusher, whether it's the Henry kid from Clemson or Will Anderson, who I love to death, is that if somehow they decide Trayvon Walker's better at three technique, add 10 pounds on his 275-pound frame and make him 285 at 6'5", which is about an inch shorter and 10 pounds lighter than Roy Robinson Harris, and the same height and maybe only 5 pounds smaller than J.J. Watt, who played that position. And then you put Will Harris and Josh Allen as your outside linebackers in the 3-4. They already do that in their lightning package on their nickel, which they're in most of the time, but they're not in it to start the game. And they won't be in it if they're not ahead most of the time. So that means you would have three guys, arguably your three best players on defense, along with Tyson Campbell. And for 40% of the time, they won't be on the field at the same time. And I just don't think that is that. I think it's counterintuitive to being a good football team. So that's why I would have moved. A lot of people thought that I was crazy about the Claypool. Well, let me get to that in a second. The people that talk to me about moving Jawan Taylor, why on earth would you do that? And right now, he's your best offensive lineman. With all due respect to Brandon Sheriff, Jawan Taylor had the best season. He came into the league as a 20-year-old. The dude's not even 25 years old yet. He's 6'5", 320 pounds, and he's had a really, really good year, and you want to get rid of him. Go look yesterday and see how many dudes at the trade deadline were offensive linemen and they were traded. Don't worry, I'll wait, because no one trades a starting offensive line because they're too hard to replace. You just don't do it. That's the guy you keep, and you re-sign him to a favorable deal, similar to the one that you gave Cam Robinson last year, and they'll be able to do that. Salary cap ain't real. They're going to make cuts and adjust some other people's salaries, and the Jaguars and then we'll know if the cap moves up, the Jaguars are going to end up with money anyway. But this Chase Claypool thing, did the Bears give up too much? Some people believe they did. I don't think so. It's because I'm looking at Claypool's first year when Roethlisberger could actually still throw the ball versus the last two, when in the first of those last two, Roethlisberger could no longer throw the ball. And then they've had very spotty quarterback play this year with Trubisky and the rookie Kenny Pickett, and expect that guy's going to have the same production. Now, there are many folks that are saying, well, you knew Pittsburgh couldn't cut it, you couldn't re-sign him because they've already paid other people and they have George Pickens. Why would you give them so much? Well, because I don't think they were betting against themselves. In fact, I found out that Green Bay was involved, but they wouldn't give up a second, that they were willing to give up something else. If that's the case, sure. Maybe if you're the Bears, you offer a third and a fifth or something, or a third and a sixth, and you keep your second. But the bottom line is they were convinced that what they needed was a 6'4", 230-pound dude that knew how to separate, that was fast, and that was physical, and give their quarterback a big target. Whether they overpaid or not, or if they didn't overpay, but Pittsburgh still got great value, both can be true. It goes back to that quandary I talked about. Everyone says they want an upgrade in talent, but no one is willing. And it doesn't mean you have to be reckless and break the bank. But at some point, there's a line that you have to decide where you're going to, which side are you going to be on? You're going to be cautious and keep all your draft picks and trust a GM that's never drafted a good wide receiver in his life, or you're going to say, he's big and physical, we got a better quarterback, he had 10 touchdowns as a rookie, we're going to give it a shot here for his second-round pick. That's what we're going to do. And I think at some point, being really, really picky super picky over compensation that's not a first round, when you haven't had a lot of talent on this team, sometimes you're hustling backwards. You have to take a risk and try, especially if you don't have a good track record of getting these types of players. I'm going to tell you about Calvin Ridley, a little bit about his actual impact on the field for Trevor Lawrence and for the Jaguars, and why it'll allow the Jaguars to focus on some other areas. And I'll tell you what those other areas will be here in the final segment of today's show. I got to let y'all know, I got to be a little bit transparent and go behind the veil here. I gave y'all abbreviated show yesterday, one that I did with Peter Bukowski, and I posted it for you guys to have some information. I recorded a whole show yesterday with my microphone on mute. And ain't nothing like a little self-deprecation. And because I waited until after the trade deadline to do that show and my NFL show on Locked On NFL that you guys need to check out, by the time I realized I was muted, it was 6 o'clock at night. I didn't want to screw up my algorithms, mess all of that stuff up. And then I was 38 hot. So I didn't want to be all angry and try to speedball out some content. And I had to get my bearings back. So that's what happened with my little snafu yesterday. And I had to double down and make sure I didn't mute this one. But I did a whole show where I explained what the word caveat was to my cousin on air because he texted me and I told him it came with a caveat. And he said, "What's a caveat?" So I had to tell him. I even read a definition of what a caveat was. And y'all missed me explaining to my cousin what the word, I think John Shipley used it yesterday too, what the word caveat was. Caveat is like a stipulation that comes with something that ain't the result you think because, and this is just the hood definition, because it's something attached to it. There you go. So shout out to me for doing that to y'all yesterday. And shout out to y'all for hanging out with me today and making sure that you got exactly what you need from Locked On Jaguars. We're going to talk Calvin Ridley, and we're going to do that in just a second. Here, after I tell you guys about today's sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is your daily fantasy game where you have entries that have player projections that PrizePicks designates. Now, it's up to you to look at it and decide whether those player projections are more or less than what's going to actually happen. And if you think you're good enough to do that, you can pick between 2 and 5 of those players with their projections attached and then decide whether it's more or less. And you can win 10 times of your money if you get them all right. When you choose between, you can get up to 10 times if you choose 5 players. There's also a flex option where out of your 5, you can even get 1 or 2 right and still get some sort of a payoff. Now you can go to prizepicks.com and enroll and start there, or you can go and download the PrizePicks app and get started. When you get started, for the first time users, as a first time users, what you'll get is a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Now it's only on your initial sign up, but if you deposit 100, you'll get 100. If you deposit 50, you'll get a $50 match and an instant deposit from PrizePicks, as long as you use the promo code, which is Locked On. That's right. So it's prizepicks.com or the PrizePicks app. Locked On for instant deposit match on your initial deposit as a first-time user. All right, man, we're going to roll along here, and I'm going to explain the silver lining to the Calvin Ridley trade that the Jacksonville Jaguars are made. But I got to remind you and thank you for making Locked On Jaguars your first listen. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today from the game for the games that matter to the most, the biggest games and the biggest stories around sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts like me and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. What does Calvin Ridley do for the Jaguars? I'll tell you what he does for the Jaguars. Calvin Ridley first gets rid of a lot of those overthrows that you see from Trevor Lawrence. Those balls will be caught now. So they're gonna help save Trevor Lawrence from himself a little bit. But you're gonna get a guy who can run underneath those balls a little bit better, has a little more speed and a little more size at about 6 feet, 6'1", about 190 pounds or so. Really muscular guy though. He was in that Alabama beef program up in Tuscaloosa. So what you're gonna get is you're gonna get Christian Kirk going back to his true number 2 spot, I believe, as a slot receiver. Zay Jones gets a chance to play outside, and you'll probably see them still address it and get another person or another player. I think it frees them up, though, to not be desperate at the wide receiver position, which they've been for a while. And I think without this trade, they would have still been desperate for a wide receiver. So I do believe that they're going to address the tight end position. I don't know what's going to be available to him in free agency, but I double dip it, and I wouldn't just get a move tight end. I get a complete tight end. I try. It's this kid I love named Musgrave out at Oregon State. If y'all ain't seen him, check him out in the draft. But there are a few guys, they missed on picking up a guy like Isaiah Likely, who's playing well for Baltimore, Greg Dosich, who's playing well for the Broncos. Doug Peterson's offense, the Andy Reid offense, you will, they've always had a dominant tight end. I like Evan Ingram a little bit, but I don't think he's the total answer that they need. I think they need to double dip at that spot. The defensive tackle, I think, still has to be addressed unless they do what I said previously, and that is decide that Trayvon is better off as a penetrator at the three technique in their three-man front. I don't know that that's the case, but they just might. The Golston kid down at Tampa, that's how they play him. They play him on that front. William Golston, that's how they play him a lot, in their three-man front. And he's a guy who's very active and makes a lot of noise. I don't think they're ready to admit that he's just a better football player than he is a pure edge rusher. And just by having him out there, I give him another offseason of trying to learn how to disengage. He's right at 2.5 sacks right now. So we'll see if he can close a little bit and try to get to 6.5 or 7. And then you have to start asking yourself, is that enough? Especially with Josh not being a double-digit guy on the other side. So, and I know I'll factor in the fact that teams have gotten the ball out a little quicker. There are a lot of teams that throw the ball quickly that get sacked every week, and I think the Jaguars definitely can improve in that area. I think they need another left guard. I think that's the spot that you can find in free agency. It's hard to imagine, though, that you're going to pay a guy and pay Jawan Taylor, and you already paid both Cam Robinson and you paid Luke Fortner. At some point, you have to be able to draft and develop people at those positions. And do they depend on that next year? I really wish they would have took Jamari Sawyer last year. Everyone talk about Bruce Pickens or George Pickens, and you're right, he's great. There's another player who played at Georgia that's starting a lot of games at left tackle because of injuries, who also could play left guard, and Jamari Sawyer, who's around in like the 5th round. Those are the things you got to hit on, man. You got to be able to get those guys. I believe they're going to have to get another safety, maybe a veteran. I'm already mentioning names. I like guys like Von Bell, who's going to be a free agent. He's active, can play in the box, and he can cover. I also believe that they need a shutdown starting corner opposite Tyson Campbell. This is where I most likely, with the wide receiver position being filled and the desperation going away, this is what really the addition of him has provided. This is where I think that if they finish in that 5 range, everyone talks about Keely Ringo. He has a lot of traits, and I know Trent loves traits. There's another kid with some traits, and his name is Joey Porter Jr., playing at Penn State. He's 6'2", 195 pounds. If they end up right there at 5, this will put them in prime position to either address edge rusher with a top talent or take the best corner on the board, which I personally believe is Joey Porter Jr., and try to shore up that left cornerback spot, because right now it ain't looking good. Everybody who gets out there gets burnt up, man. They get toasted up. And I don't know if you're going to find that in free agency. And once again, I don't know if for the second straight year you can go give money to a corner when you just paid Darius Williams all of that money to play nickel, which he doesn't play very often hadn't played before he got here. So what really does is it gives them someone who can play on the field, something that they desperately need in order to realign the priorities of their wide receivers. It gives them a chance now to come back maybe in the 4th round and there's a kid at Wake Forest that I really love that's big and can high point the ball. It gives them a chance to address wide receiver in a reasonable, and don't reach for a guy. Don't take the Addison kid out from USC in the 1st round, and then the dude at Ohio State has been hurt all year. So it gives you don't need to reach right now. You can go ahead and understand that you can move with the guys that you have. And if you find something on the secondary market in free agency, you can go ahead and take him, or you can develop a guy that you can pick maybe in the 3rd or 4th round. But the main thing, it gives you an opportunity to use your first 2 picks on other priority positions and kind of shore that up a little bit. Look, the Jags are only 5 or 6 really good players away. And I know that doesn't sound as small as I make it sound, but I'm serious. If they can get 2 guys in free agency let's just say at safety and guard, right? And then with their first 3 picks in the draft, get a corner, a tight end, and a defensive tackle, or a corner, a tight end, and another wide receiver, and they can actually play, you guys will start seeing that this thing will get a little bit closer. All right, man. So we'll be back on tomorrow with our crossover edition with your boy Q from the Raiders. Then we'll have a nice Friday show. I'm going to try to do a instant reaction show. I'll actually be out of the country, but I'll be watching the game and I'll try to do a reaction show Sunday. I'll try to go live with that and see how it works as long as the Wi-Fi is good where I'll be in that location. So until then, you guys make sure you take care of each other. Calvin Ridley's coming to Jacksonville next year. You get some help, but you just don't get it right away. It's like you put your Christmas stuff on layaway and you ain't going to be able to open it until after New Year's. All right, man. Tony Wiggins, join us tomorrow. Make sure you take care of each other. We'll see you next time.